More reaction coming in now to the breaking news unfolding this evening. Via Rail announcing that it's canceled its services across Canada until further notice. That followed CN Rail's announcement that it's shutting down its Eastern Canada operations due to ongoing protests blocking rail lines. What exactly could these shutdowns mean for companies that rely on rail to transport their products? Bob Masterson is the CEO of the Chemistry Industry Association. He joins us in studio. Hi, Mr. Masterson. Thanks for coming in on such short notice. Let me get your read, first of all, on the, before I get into what exactly you represent, but just your initial reaction to the breadth of this shutdown.
Oh, it's an extremely dire situation, and we'll talk a bit about companies that I represent, but it's really a dire situation for the economy, and it's a dire situation in the coming days for communities across Canada and for Canadians individually. I think people don't understand what this really means.
We had seen over the past few days the beginnings of this. Were you expecting it to escalate to this degree?
No, not at all, in fact, and there's three things underway. People are focused on the blockades, but there was an incident in Saskatchewan last week. Minister Garneau put in an order to slow trains. Things were already looking difficult. The railways responded by basically shutting in some key commodities, including some of the commodities that our industry sends, which are key to public safety, things like chlorine for drinking water, propane to heat homes. These things were shut in, and then on top of that, you had the blockade. Surprised, definitely, and I think that's the thing that people don't understand. I've had people say to me, hey, Bob, we've heard this before. You were on here in December. You talked about the strike. That was a nothing burger. That's all gone. Hey, we had months of warning of the CN negotiations that they were going to be tough. The railways, the shippers, and the customers all took in everything they could to get through that. And this situation has caught everybody by surprise, and it is in a critical situation.
So explain to myself and our viewers exactly who you represent and how they're being impacted by
Well,
this.
we're a $60 billion a year industry, and 80% of everything we ship goes by rail. So there's a number for you right there. But let's talk about what we ship by rail and where it goes. So our goods go into all other industries in Canada, forest products, mining, you name it, that you have to have chemicals to do that, and large volumes of chemicals. Where we're focused on right now, though, is the critical public safety elements. And so we have very important chemicals that treat drinking water, that treat water treatment chemicals so that what gets discharged into the Ottawa River and elsewhere is clean, doesn't harm the environment. De-icing fluids at airports, jet fuel that goes to airports. We took an unprecedented step this afternoon. I wrote to every single member of Parliament, and I said, please, call the local municipalities in your riding and ask them, how many days do you have on standby so that you can safely treat your drinking water? How many days does your local airport have to operate with jet fuel and de-icing fluid? How many days does a local fuel depot have before it runs dry? And once you find out those answers, I think those MPs will be, in most cases, except for our major metropolitan areas, will be at least as concerned as I am, if not more.
Speaking of those MPs, what are you hoping for from the government right now?
Well, from the federal government and the provincial government, this is a very tricky situation. And let's talk about first in British Columbia, New Hazelton. An injunction has been issued, okay? And that has to be enforced by the RCMP. And there's a role between British Columbia and the federal government to make sure that happens. We have a very tricky situation in Ontario where, again, in Belleville, an injunction has been issued. That has to be enforced. You know, everybody has the right to protest in Canada. That's clear. I don't get to decide what's enough or what's too much. It's the judiciary process and the courts to decide. In the case of Belleville, in the case of New Hazelton, BC, the courts have said, you've gone too far. You've taken it too far. It's no longer in the public interest. Those injunctions have to be enforced.
My understanding from what CN has said so far is that particularly what's impacting their decision today is the lack of enforcement in Ontario.
Yes.
Is that your understanding as well? And do you have any sense as to
why? Well, look, I've heard since last Friday that the situation in New Hazelton was about to be resolved, that the injunction was issued. It's not resolved yet. Okay. I'm hearing maybe today. We've heard Winnipeg is cleared up. We're hearing New Hazelton maybe today. Let's make sure that we're not out of the woods there yet. But the situation in Belleville is absolutely critical. You know, we have the Premier's office in Ontario saying not their problem. We had the Premier of Ontario speaking with the Premier of Quebec today, after which the Premier of Quebec said it's not Ontario's problem, it's not Quebec's problem, this is inconvenience to our people, and the problem rests with the federal government.
Do you agree with that?
I think all levels of government have a role here.
To be fair to the province, I think that they are concerned. They're expressing concern, but you're right.
The injunction was issued in Ontario, and in Ontario, the Ontario Provincial Police have jurisdiction to enforce that injunction. It is a very tricky situation involving Indigenous people, and that also involves the federal government. But certainly, if the province of Ontario is unable to enforce that injunction, they have a duty to contact Ottawa and say, we can't do this in the national interest. You're going to have to send your authorities to make that happen. Based on what you've seen from governments involved in this so far, are you satisfied with the level of engagement? Not at all. And this is why today, as I mentioned, we took the unprecedented step of writing to all MPs saying, go look in your own communities, ask these questions, and see what you find. And I think you're going to come back with a heightened sense of urgency. Look, we've heard the federal government say this is a time for dialogue and negotiation, and certainly that's important too. But what we've not heard them say is the actions are illegal, this is trespassing, you will be removed, and you need to be ready to be removed soon. And we haven't heard any of that. Might that risk sort of further escalating things? That'd be my, I'm not an expert at all, but. Either am I, and that's why I'm not there. But on the other hand, doing nothing also escalates things. It's become a party atmosphere. The tents are up, everybody's having a good time. That's clearly not a solution either. It's a serious situation, and you know, if I look forward a little bit, I think there's a few things that we will get through this crisis. Canada goes through crisis after crisis after crisis. We'll get through. It hurts now, but we will get through. When you look ahead, though, you know, Canada has had two things working in its favor as an investment destination. It has had good reliable infrastructure and the rule of law. And I can tell you, the foreign investors now, the $60 billion I talked about in our industry, every penny of that is foreign investment. They are asking the question, what happened to the rule of law in Canada? What happened to infrastructure? We've had 4 significant rail disruptions in the last 36 months. So if I take a step back... But those haven't all been because of something like strike, weather, blockades, but I mean, ministerial orders. I take your point, but I think some of what's happening right now, and even with the strikes, are part of the system that we enjoy, right? You have a right to protest. I understand that if you go to the courts and there's an injunction, that's a different story. I think for a lot of people, you know, at least what I've witnessed hasn't necessarily been a party atmosphere. They're genuinely concerned about some of their own rights too. Certainly I would agree with that. That's true with the Indigenous people themselves. I would question about some of the hangers-on. What I would say, though, to finish, if we look ahead, what else has to happen? As a nation, we have to look carefully at our rail system, and we have to look at how do we build some resiliency into that system. We cannot go there's 3 years in a row, 4 critical issues. We can't let that continue to happen. And then we have to look at our relationship with Indigenous people. And I know we talk a good game, but we have to find a way, nation to nation, to get some certainty here. Look, if you ask my opinion, this is a dress rehearsal for what we're going to see as the TMX proceeds and some of these other developments. So folks, get used to it. We don't have answers, and we are in a very, very difficult spot. Tonight, we're focused on critical public safety. Again, we will find a way through this crisis, but there are some longer-term serious issues for us to look at if we want to be a prosperous economy that attracts foreign investment. Well, I really appreciate you coming in this evening, again on such short notice. Thanks so much to Bob Masterson, CEO of the Chemistry Industry Association. We will, of course, have more on this